Hello, everybody, and welcome to Teachers in the Dungeon. I'm Tom Gross.
And I'm Dan Ream. Tom, those goblins finally let me go. Took me a while to crawl back up here, but I'm good. I'm ready.
Take a look at the decorating they've done in here. I mean, it's interesting lighting, but it's their holiday lighting. I mean, it's great, isn't it? Well, if you are a first-time listener to Teachers in the Dungeon, thanks for joining us today. Hope you have a good time. Let us know what you think. Join us on our social media. We are on Facebook and Instagram, Teachers in the Dungeon. We're on Twitter at Dungeon Teachers. And don't forget to check out our YouTube channel, where Dan does a great job of adding images and some AI art to go along with the show to bring the fun along with. If you've been with us for a while, thanks for coming back to the dungeon with us today. We have a special guest today here in the dungeon. We brushed off the old stone chair. Our guest today has worked for Wizards of the Coast for more than a decade, creating worlds, adventures for D&D and Magic the Gathering, and now works as a story consultant, a world builder, creative writer for Mysterious Alchemy, which he co-founded with his friend Ari Levitch. Bringing to the dungeon today, we've got Ari. We have Adam Lee joining us today here in the dungeon. How you doing, Adam?
I'm doing well, thanks. Yeah, Ari's actually here in spirit, I'm sure.
Excellent. And Adam, we are here to talk to you today about the new book that you have out, Dungeons and Dragons, Worlds and Realms, published by 10 Speed Press. But before we get to that, we always like to start with a new guest to the dungeon. We'd like to ask you what your origin story is. Where and when did you start playing Dungeons and Dragons or role playing? And tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. I have to go way back into time. Yeah, when I was probably, I would say, 8 or 10 years old. My brother brought back the Monster Manual, the first edition Monster Manual. And my brother was my older brother, but he never liked to read the rules. He just liked to play the game. So he would just give me games and be like, figure it out. And when you figure it out, then we'll play it. I was like, okay. Well, he gave me the first edition Monster Manual, and I was like, what is this thing? It had rules, and it had numbers and strange like dice, was talking about, and it was talking about armor class and all these things. And I was like, I don't really understand these rules, but I know there's something here. But the art was super compelling, and it was mysterious and bizarre. And so I told him, after I read it, I was like, oh, there's these other books. So I was like, we got to go to the game store and get these, the Player's Handbook and the Dungeon Master Guide. So that was like, we saved up our money and we got the next 2 books. And then I think we also got like the red box. And then that was when we started. And I had never we both were kind of creative kids growing up, but we'd never done any role playing. We kind of I figured out the rules sort of, and then we had our first quote unquote game, and it was bizarre and crazy and wonderful. And I think I rolled off the random charts in the Dungeon Master's Guide to make up an adventure, it was just like these rooms, and we were trying to fight. And it was sort of like our own sort of mishmash of our homebrew plus the rules, and that was it. And as soon as we did it, we were hooked, and it was amazing. And that was the lifelong sort of all the way through grade school, all the way through high school, college. We were both playing Dungeons and Dragons and a host of other role-playing games. So that was the moment it happened. And it totally, like I think most people, it kind of changes your life into this new sort of storytelling way. And I definitely, it improved me as a writer and as a creative thinker, and also just as a person. I learned how to, collaborate with people and to, make sure everybody's having fun. And it was a good experience just as a human being. So,
yeah, Tom, I think we need to go back and see how many older brothers are responsible for introducing. I think I've heard that quite a few times.
Indeed. Yeah, I do love that. My older brother wanted nothing to do with Dungeons and Dragons, but yes, there are many people who that's a in fact, the guy who introduced me back in the day, and again, Redbox era, his brother introduced it to him. So I guess I could say my best friend's brother introduced it to us. But
1 degree removed. Yeah.
that's right. So how did role playing lead you to where you made it over to Wizards of the Coast? I mean, all of us look at that and we're like, wow, that would be so cool. How did you get there? What's your path to that route?
Yeah, it was a strange, although I played Dungeons and Dragons as a kid, I also played Magic the Gathering later on, kind of like late in high school. I never thought about working for Wizards of the Coast. It just didn't cross my mind. It was like, this is a game that I play, and I never thought like, oh, I could actually be a part of the people who make this thing. So oddly enough, my career path, took me into greeting cards. I I wound up working as a writer and a designer for American Greetings, and I worked there for a while, and that was in Cleveland, Ohio. So originally, like I was born in Cleveland, so I grew up in Northern California, but then I moved back after college, and I went back to Ohio, and when I was out there, I met a buddy, and he was an illustrator for Magic the Gathering. His name was Matt Cavada. And he was also a big D&D player. And so we kind of hit it off. You know, it's just kind of like when you meet somebody who's played Dungeons and Dragons and you're looking to like make pals. As soon as you know, do you play D&D? It's like, oh, yes, I do. And then it's great. All right, let's play a game and let's hang out. And you know, you kind of know you have a compatriot. You can talk about fantasy, nerdy stuff. And so anyway, he was an illustrator for Magic. And he wound up eventually moving out to the Wizards of the Coast headquarters and working there in-house. And he called me up because he knew I was a writer. And he said, hey, I'm now kind of a creative director, and I need somebody to like help do some world building and help, you know, write Magic cards and do that kind of stuff. So I started working freelance for Wizards of the Coast, and that was like in 2005. And worked on a bunch of sets, and it was kind of like my labor of love. Like I had my sort of career like as a greeting card writer, but this was the thing I did on the side that was just pure joy. And over time, I went to freelance, and I was just freelance art and writing. But then Wizards expanded, and the creative team at Magic said, hey, we really like your stuff. Would you want to move out and work in-house? So it was kind of a weird thing that at that moment, I just kind of, I told my then wife, I was like, I've written my last birthday card, and I've written my last Christmas card. I'm just done with greeting cards. And I didn't know what I was going to do. And then all of a sudden, maybe 6 weeks later, I got the call from Wizards. So it was a little bit of cosmic fortune. Then I moved out, and that was it. I was in Wizards of the Coast, and I was working on Magic for 4 years, and then there opened up a place on the Dungeons and Dragons team, and I jumped over because D&D was my first love. So strange tale.
So Dan, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt here because I know you've got the next question, but I have to ask. I'm fascinated by the greeting card aspect. It's nothing to do with that. So do you have like a collection of cards that are ones that you wrote and were published, and you got those in a scrapbook someplace?
You know, I used to, but there was a moment where I was like clearing out stuff because I'll amass stuff, and then I do like a giant purge of all of it, you know, and in some ways I'm kind of like, you know, I should have kept that. But in other ways, I just feel like it's good for my system. But I purged all the greeting cards. But I remember I did a greeting card for Hallmark that I still remember to this day. And it was a snowman, and it was saying, I wish you a Merry Christmas. And he was singing it on the front. But then the sun was out, and he's slowly melting, and then the inside is just kind of a pool, and he's just like blurp, 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 you know. So, and that was one of my best sellers. So
I love it.
But the interesting thing about it was that writing greeting cards actually prepared me for writing for Magic, because I started off on Magic writing what they call the flavor text, which are these little blurbs at the bottom of the card, and you maybe have 2 lines at the most. because the cards are small and you've got to write these little like compelling story blurbs. And greeting card writing is the same principle, where you're taking a giant concept like, how much do I love my partner? And you're having to condense it down to a very snappy statement that captures somebody's attention. The sort of, at that time, he was the sort of like one of the owners of American Greetings was this guy called Irving Stone. And I think it was either him or his father or his father-in-law who started the company. And Irving said this really interesting thing that stuck with me. He said, greeting cards are the art attracts and the inside the copy sells. So, as a writer, we had that kind of mantra in our head, and we knew that the copy was going to sell the card. So it really kind of helped me, throughout my whole career. So, it's the things you pick up, little bits of wisdom. So.
Well, I am, to be honest, I'm kind of struggling how to even jump into this. This book, Tom gave me the copy of your book, and to me, obviously as a D&D player, this was just like a giant treasure chest. There's every page makes me want to stop and stare. Right now, I've got Sigil open. That's my next task, is to do a deep dive into there. So, just for lack of a more focused attempt, can you just start off by telling us what do you see as the purpose of this book?
Yeah, I got to know 10 Speed because I worked with them when I was at Wizards. I helped them. They were wanting to do books for Wizards of the Coast, and we went into a room and I blocked out the idea for the Young Adventurer's Guide. And then that eventually got handed off to Jim Zub to sort of take that football and run with it. And he and Stacy and Andrew did a great job. But when I left Wizards, 10 Speed knew about me, and I stayed in touch with Aaron and Shada Vermond, who was my editor on this book. And she approached me and said, "Hey, we want to do this 50th anniversary of D&D celebration book, and we want to do all the worlds of Dungeons and Dragons. And would you be interested in doing that?" So I said, "Well, let me think about what I would want to do, and I'll get back to you." And so I sat down and I thought about this book. And when I worked at Dungeons and Dragons, we did a lot of what we call like gazetteer and encyclopedia entry books, where it's sort of like you go to a world and it says, here's all the information about the world, and here's all the things you'll see, and here's the monsters, and it's written in this sort of third person, omniscient point of view, like. And I was like, well, I don't want to do that, because I've done that before, and when I was working at Wizards, and I've also like read a bunch of that in the past, and I think fans would be sort of like, okay, it's just another one of those books. And then there was also the history part of it, like Gary Gygax made this thing back in 1974, and Dave Arneson and all these people who were involved. And I was like, well, I don't want to write an academic sort of version of it. John Peterson and Michael Whitwer and their team, they had already done something like that with Arts and Arcana. And, so I was like, I don't want to do that either. And so I was also looking for like, what would be really fun for me? What would light me up? And that's when I came on to this idea of it would be fun to write a prose from the point of view of a character in world. And fairly quickly, I came on Mordenkainen, because I didn't want to write Elminster, because that was Ed Greenwood had written a ton of words about him. And I knew that Mordenkainen, there wasn't a lot of, people had written about him, and I think Ed's written about him as well, but not a lot of people have written about Mordenkainen. So I was like, that seems like a character that could be developed more. It's also a character that, perfectly was created by Gary Gygax, went through from first edition all the way through all the editions, and still in fifth edition, we've used Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes and all that. So he's relevant throughout it all. He's also a planeswalker and like an iconic wizard and a great face for Dungeons and Dragons. So I settled on that. And I was like, and so I wrote, emailed back to Shada and said, hey, if we do this book, here's how I'd want to do it. And they loved it. They bounced off Wizards. Wizards loved it. Paul Morrissey, who's running the Wizard side of things. So that was how it all kind of came together, and how the idea and concept of this book came together. So it was kind of like Mordenkainen's start on Greyhawk, because he's native to Greyhawk. He was born there. So you kind of follow him through Greyhawk, and then as he world hops, he's going to kind of tell you what's going on in each world. What does he think? He's a wizard, and he's, he has this very interesting point of view. And that was, something that evolved as I wrote the book. I learned more about sort of my take on Mordenkainen. Like, what does he think is important, and what concerns him when he goes from world to world? So to get to who the audience was, that was where I was talking with Shada and saying, sort of from their point of view, and they were like, well, we'd love it. Because I said, we can write this for the old school players. Is this supposed to be a thing for them? Or is it also for new players as well? And they were like, well, we would love to be both. That would be great. And so that was a bit of a challenge, was how do I put in, so I needed to write things that, got people back to what they loved about Greyhawk. The things that, oh yeah, I remember that. I remember, Vecna. I remember Farazdan. I remember all these old school Greyhawk iconic characters and locations. And there's a little bit of the lore that you can find in any, old D&D book. But I also wanted to give kind of tone and vibe and an overview for new players who have never heard about Greyhawk before. And they're like, what is this thing? And then they get to go in there and they learn the basics about each plane. But then I wanted to write in things that nobody has ever heard of. And a lot of them are things that I just made up. And they draw on, I'm basing it on all stuff that's in the lore, but then I'm kind of rolling on my own sort of, like, here's a thing I'm making up, so that old players and new players, like especially the old players will be like, I never heard of this before. Oh my gosh, this is cool. But I was also writing it for dungeon masters, because the one thing I love to do inside of all my writing for Dungeons and Dragons is to inspire new ideas for campaigns, new ideas for stories, new ideas for adventures. And some of them are really small. Like, I might drop a little hint and say, there is this ancient temple that's on Mystara or something. And they're like, oh my gosh. Or I'll write something like, these forces are trying to take this one plane. And then it's like, the dungeon master can be like, oh, that's a giant campaign that I can run. So all that is mixed in the cauldron, and and then it bubbles away, and hopefully stories and adventures come out of it.
Well, just speaking for myself, I would say, based on what you've said you wanted to accomplish, I think you knocked that out of the park.
Oh, thanks. That's awesome to hear.
I was telling Tom today, unsurprisingly, given my love of D&D, I read through Lord of the Rings when I was 12, and I just had that hangover after that. After I was done, for like the next 2 weeks, just of I'm not in that world anymore. And any good fantasy novel I read, I kind of get that feeling, and I kind of had that even just after skimming through this. I put it down, and the next day I was like, why am I depressed? Like, it's because I'm not in that world anymore. I need to go back. So,
oh man.
So it is. I like the way you described it. I'm just seeing the different parts of it click into place that I had stopped and read and thought. And yeah, I had all the reactions that you said. I remember seeing things and thinking, I have to incorporate this in my next homebrew. And so,
cool.
this is quite a book.
Oh man. Oh, thank you. That's makes my heart happy. That's exactly what I wanted. When I was writing these things, I was like, oh, I hope somebody catches this and just gets super jazzed about it and wants to make up a story, or just like, I'm going to run my friends through this part, So that's great. Awesome.
Well, and just to build on what Dan was saying, anyone listening to this needs to know that this is going to be a book that is going to compel you to read. I was reading the part this morning before coming to work, and sadly I started it without enough time before I had to leave for work. It's the part in Eberron where Mordenkainen is talking to the Warforged who works in the tavern. And
Yeah.
he's talking about, like, I want to go explore the mist, the Mornland, the mist of the Mornland, and all of that. And the Warforged takes the glass and sets it right down and says, "I'll take you there." And I was like, "Oh, I got to go to work," and I've been thinking about that ever since. So you're writing. Okay, so my point of telling that is, first of all, I love that part, but the writing throughout that we've been reading has just been so compelling from all the points of view that you're talking about, as a player, as a historian, as a lover of fiction. It draws me and it gives me ideas, all of the things you're just talking about. So one, thank you for that. And two, everyone listening, you cannot pass up this book. If you have the opportunity, put it on your Christmas list. Worlds and Realms, Adam Lee. It is a fantastic book. But I'm going to toss it back to Dan because you've got another question, I know.
Yeah, I was going to say I was going to grab the mic back from you, actually, but glad you handed it off willingly. So one of the through lines in your book is this concept of balance, and you make a point of having Mordenkainen address that in each of the worlds. I just wanted to know kind of your viewpoint on that. I don't even know the question I want to ask. Maybe why you chose to put that in, what that meant to you, or how you think that affects the D&D worlds. How does that work?
Yeah, the Mordenkainen from the sort of beginning was always he started this order way back in first edition, and then Greyhawk, called the Circle of Eight. And it was this consortium of wizards and adventurers. They were all about, at first they were about making loot and, going into dungeons and all that. But then as time went on, they became more of like, heroes that stopped evil from destroying Greyhawk, at least. As a Mordenkainen as a character, even when we were talking about him in 5th edition, like when I was working at Wizards and down on Dungeons and Dragons, we were talking about Mordenkainen as he's sort of like trying to bring balance to the multiverse. And that's as far as we really discussed him. So when I got this character, the very first thing that I had to do as a writer was to get over the sort of being intimidated by, like, I'm taking Gary Gygax's character that's just iconic to D&D. People know him and love him. And I felt this immense responsibility to bring this character to life in my own way. But I realized, hey, this is for Dungeons and Dragons. And the main thing about Dungeons and Dragons is you make the game your own thing, and also you get to play a character. And that's how I approached Mordenkainen. Was I'm taking this character, this beloved character, I'm going to play him the way that I would play him. And I'm going to honor the character as he's existed throughout the game, but then I'm going to kind of put my own spin on him. And so the balance was a great, and Shada was one. She said, hey, wouldn't it be cool if at the end of sort of every chapter we had this section just called the balance? And she's like, whatever you want to put in there. Because she and I had discussed sort of what the character was and sort of my thinking about, hey, Mordenkainen is really concerned with this. So she had this great idea to do that. And it tied that whole book together, and it created that theme that you're talking about. It hit a lot of levels. One level was just inside the game. It gives the players something to do. Every world is in this flux, and there are all these forces that are working together. Some are evil and trying to take and over things, and some are trying to destroy the world. And so Mordenkainen is trying to figure out how do we defeat the forces of evil and bring goodness and harmony back to the world. But he's also bringing up this thing, like in Dungeons and Dragons, you have chaos and law, and those two things are conflicting. And a lot of people think automatically, like, oh, chaos is bad and law is good, but not necessarily the case. Like, chaos brings what makes freedom and humanity and like our ability to choose and to, forge our own destinies. Whereas like something like absolute law, which is the Modrons, they really don't have any agency. They are programmed to do what they do, and they have no freedom outside of their program. So Mordenkainen sees already, and he kind of goes into this in little sections of the book where he's like, we can't follow the celestial angelic law, which is completely rigid, and there's no freedom within that. But we also can't go to the chaos and the anarchy of the demons and that realm. So he's like, where's this balance? So in the game, he's kind of setting up on every world. There's these pushes and pulls between law and chaos and good and evil. And he's telling the adventurers and heroes, go to this world, try to restore balance. Don't go too far one side, don't go too far the other side. But also, as I was writing this is like last year, and it took me about 9 months to write the main sort of beef of the manuscript. I was, looking at our own world, and in the same way, wondering like, we are so polarized, and how can we bring sort of balance to our own life, as people and as a country and as a world and all that. So there was a catharsis. It was a cathartic, therapeutic manuscript to write, because I feel like Mordenkainen cared about the same things that I was caring about, and it was like, how do we all get along? In fact, Sigil is going to be a really interesting section to read, because that's the plane of where the Lady of Pain is, and it's where she holds this sort of like neutral, complete, pure neutrality in the middle of the Outlands. And it's this grand experiment, and it sort of like shows that there is this potential to balance everything. Because in the city of Sigil, there are angels and demons and devils, and they all sort of have to get along. And if they don't do it, the Lady of Pain will come in and she'll banish them. So they have to choose, even though they have their proclivities to be, authoritarian or destructive. They have to abandon that, and they have to find a way to get along. And so Mordenkainen has this sort of observation of that. So yeah, there was a in-game purpose for that, for the balance. But then there's also this meta part of the game, or the part of the writing, which is sort of my own sort of observations of our world, and how can we work things out between each other and all that kind of stuff. So it was helpful for me, because I think it was a really, we're still in those kind of bumpy times, but I think more and more people are trying to find a way to learn to get along, and learn to be tolerant, and learn to be open-minded, and try to find a way to make it work. So, and Mordenkainen would be very happy with that.
Well, thanks for sharing your thoughts on that. I will say I did kind of pick up on that a little bit. I don't think I could have put it into words, but I did find some things and thought, that could be our world. Okay. So, yeah. All right, Tom, I will very reluctantly hand the mic over to you for a little bit here.
Well, to kind of wrap on that, as I've been reading this book, it really has made me think about that age-old kind of side conversation you have with Dungeons and Dragons as to alignment. It's not a thing you talk about maybe every time you sit down at the table, but it's something that in between sessions, I think you think about more, like, did I act the way I was supposed to? Did I play my character the way that, and what is chaotic evil, and what is neutral? And so all of Mordenkainen's and your thoughts in this book really sort of help to shape that and develop it, and really makes you question it even more, and not question it in a negative way, but like in an understanding sort of way. So I really appreciate the work that you did on that. I was curious to hear your thoughts on, at the end of each of these chapters, so we talk about balance at the end of the chapters, but then at the end of each chapter, they end with a small fictional piece, a bit of a story from a variety of different authors. And I was curious what your role was in that, or if any, and how that sort of all came together.
Yeah, those, I believe, that was an idea from Paul Morrissey, who was, on the wizard side of things. And he wanted to bring in some authors from around the community, the Dungeons and Dragons community, just to write in these like little vignettes and that were a part of the world. And I didn't have any influence as far as like discussing with them what to write. They took it and ran with it. I don't know if they had parts of my manuscript, like what I was writing about, or if they were just like, hey, do something on Greyhawk. But yeah, each of those, they're great. They're wonderful. They're fun. And they've got their own sort of little, it's just like the slice of something happened before, something happened after, and you're just catching this like little middle part. But they are adventure hooks as well. I mean, some of the, the ones I've read, they'll make me think, oh, I could do an adventure here, or, oh, that's a fun NPC to put in a game, or, oh, that's an interesting concept that I would love to put in, a story. So and they're very different and unique and fun. But yeah. And the weird thing is I don't think I've met any of them personally. On any of those authors. So it would be great to like one day just have everybody in a room and just like, I don't know, have some lunch or something, or, and just chat about it. Cause everybody came in and did a great job and made the book. It just gave it a little bit of another flavor to it, which I really appreciated. It was really cool.
Dan had alluded to this earlier, and that is when you open this book, aside from the text is this incredible art. And so I'm kind of curious as to your thoughts, your experience in working with this. Now, you mentioned Michael Whitwer and the group that did Art and Arcana, and you mentioned Jim Zub and Stacy. We've talked to all of them about art in their books. And so I'm dying to hear what your experience is in, first of all, any input that you had in this, and then now that the book is out, your reactions or your thoughts about your text aside some of this art.
It's weird because a lot of the art, especially the early art, it's a part of my childhood, and so it was really fun to, I knew that there were going to be some images in there that these are the ones I picked. But there was so much art that eventually had to be pulled, and a lot of that art had to be what they call de-archived from the Wizards databases. And I believe it was Jefferson Dunlap, who worked at Wizards, who tirelessly pulled like from all the different editions and all the different worlds, because not only was it like you're pulling from Greyhawk, Mystara, Kryn, all these worlds, but then you're also pulling all editions from all those worlds. So it was really a team effort on that part of it. And then there were, the graphic designers at 10 Speed did an amazing job. I know that Betsy and I believe it was Debbie, they did, amazing work, and they just made it look so cool. A lot of the time it was them, like I had my text, and they were working to create, like they would read the text and then they would put images that kind of related to that thing and to the story. And so it was definitely, that was a big team effort on that and that part of it. I got a chance to say, hey, these are the pieces that I really love, or these are the pieces that are iconic. But the big heavy lifting came from the graphic team at 10 Speed and Jefferson Dunlap, who I believe was pulling just tons of art and was a big help. So yeah, lots of appreciation for them.
So this is something, again, every D&Der's probably got this sort of thing tucked in their brain somewhere. Just curious, what would be your favorite, or let's say first plane to visit if you found yourself in the D&D world?
Oh man. Yeah, that would be very interesting. I guess it would depend on the day. Like if I was really wanting to have a real bizarre experience, I would go to Sigil in the Outlands, and just to see what it is like for just all the worlds to come together. I mean, what a crazy circus that place would be. Sigil is also a paradox because the city exists at the top of it. In the lore, it's at the top of infinite spire. So right away, like, okay, that doesn't make any sense. Like, how does this thing work? But since it is a plane of absolute neutrality, it's like it is already paradoxical. It's like this sort of like singularity black hole kind of defies physics place. But then there's a part of me that would love to go to like Neverwinter and on Faerun and just enjoy like walking around that city and seeing all the artwork and the bridges and the architecture and that would be cool. And then part of me would love to go to Feywild and just to experience, like, I've been to that place in my mind. I would love to go to like a Fey market and just experience all the little magic items you could get there, and, little trinkets that are magical. That would be super fun. What else? What else would be fun? Greyhawk would be rough. I think if I was like, okay, I want to like swing a sword and like get down to like some serious adventuring. But I've always thought of Greyhawk as being very gritty and it's tough and it's first edition, so the dungeon master's out to get you and out to trick you with like rot grubs and that kind of stuff. So I'm just no, but I'd want to be there just to say I was there, so.
Yeah, I have to say that, and I know, Dan, you didn't ask me the question, but I'm going to answer it anyway.
I was gonna.
Oh, you're going to? Okay, good. Again, kind of like your Greyhawk answer, Adam. Eberron would be the place that I would want to go, but
Cool.
you don't really want to go someplace that has like post-war and has the Mournland that's awful. But boy, would I love to go see the city of Sharn and ride a lightning rail or one of the elemental ships or something like that. That would be really cool to see that.
Yeah, see Moorgrave University and the Library of Kornberg, and
right.
That would be epic. That would be a really cool place, and it makes me think of it's. I mean, in some ways, Eberron is kind of like our world. It's just a little bit. It's a kind of a sci-fi fantasy version, but yeah, that would be. I mean, the giant, enormous buildings that go and just that multi-leveled. The way it's structured. I remember when I was working at Wizards, we had a game that we would play in Eberron, like on Fridays, and Mike Merles was running it, and he did a great job just being a DM for that, and it was a lot of fun. So
nice. How about you, Dan?
I think I'll just be difficult and say whatever plane I could have sort of a remote, peaceful forest that's very Fey touched, but maybe not full on Feywild. Love to hang out with some satyrs and dryads, but I don't want the grass to suddenly swallow me up or never be able to come back. Guess I'm just kind of a wimp that way.
You don't want your feet stomped on by a redcap or anything like that?
No, I don't need that.
Okay. Well, this has been wonderful being able to visit with you, Adam, and as much of a treat as reading your book, Worlds and Realms. But before we go, I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about your current project with Mysterious Alchemy. Tell us about what you're doing there.
Yeah, so that was Ari and I, when we left Wizards of the Coast, we formed sort of our own Wizards consortium, and we knew that we loved world building. We both worked in sort of the Magic world building teams for a long time, which was amazing because we're just building in Magic in the early days when I was there, or relative early days, we were building pretty much a world a year. And so we would be a world would be hitting the market. We'd be working on a world right in the middle of it, and then we'd be ideating the world for next year. So it was this amazing machine where we were, working with amazing fantasy artists, and we were building stuff, and it was a super creative time. So we knew we loved to do that, and we also knew how to do creative jam sessions and how to work within a creative team and how to get the best out of writers. So we knew also how to break people out of their, being uptight or being censoring themselves. And so we knew about that, and we built all these skills. So as we were talking about it, after we left Wizards, we did work for Larian, and we did work for some other video game companies, and we still had our foot in like the tabletop RPG space. So we were doing D&D stuff for Ghostfire, and we did a Miyazaki-inspired world called Obajima that is going to be released out, I think, later this year or next year. So we were working still in the D&D space, but we were building different kinds of worlds. So Mysterious Alchemy, the whole concept behind it is that we bring together creative people, whether they're writers or artists, for each project. And each project has different sort of problems to solve. But the idea is that creativity is a mysterious alchemy. It's you're bringing all these different people together, and they work and they create, and from that, strange metals coming together, you create creative gold. And one of the things we've done, and lately, because Ari went on now, he's the narrative director at Lorcana, which is a Ravensburger company, doing the Disney trading card game, and we both went in there to help their narrative team grow and teach them about trading card games like Magic, and then build and hire their staff. So facilitate creative meetings and all that kind of stuff. So we also operated as mentors as well, because we've been in the industry for a while now, and we feel like we had some good stuff, some hard learned lessons to pass on. And I think, on one way we could say that we're an IP development company. We develop intellectual property. So we come up with characters and worlds and stories. But we also did a lot of script doctoring. Like people would be like, hey, we've got this script, whether it's a narrative script or a movie script or a screenplay or, whatever it is, and or story, a novel. And, hey, do you think this is cool, or what would you do, or what ideas would you have? And we can take that. And so we did all different kinds. We had our fingers in all kinds of different pies, and which was great. It was very creatively stimulating and fun. And it's great because the actual company, Mysterious Alchemy, it can expand and contract. It can be as much as just me or just Ari, and it can grow. Like there were a couple of times where we hired on around 5-8 different artists, and to expand the team and to tackle bigger projects. So it can expand and contract as needed. And really, it was just about creatives having a lot of fun, because we got to know a lot of really talented people in our time working at Wizards, and they all kind of became our friends to some degree. And it's like we wanted to share that experience. It's like there's nothing more fun than having a really cool project and having all your pals working together on it, because it's just like being back at the D&D table and just making up a world together. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun so far, and fingers crossed we keep on doing interesting stuff.
I was going to say, that sounds, sitting around and dreaming up worlds, that does kind of sound like a dream job.
It is. It's pretty cool, and I think that was one of the things that I wanted to put at the end of this book, Worlds and Realms, was there's a little sort of epilogue about world building and the art of world building. And as I was working on Worlds and Realms, I got very present to all the I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, right? And that there are these Greyhawk, Mystara, Kryn, Forgotten Realms, Eberron, they're all created by these creative people who love D&D, and they built this thing. And it was I got to build some worlds of my own in Magic while I was at Magic, and I got to work on the worlds and expand on the worlds that were created by these creatives, and it was really an honor to do it, and I felt very appreciative of just like, I don't know, like it's weird to think that me being a kid and learning about Greyhawk, and then now I'm working on it. I'm expanding on Gary Gygax's work. I'm expanding on Ed Greenwood's work, or Keith Baker's work. I mean, they're all these people that I admired, and I love their creativity and their the world that they've created, they helped create, and getting to play with that, even like worlds that were illustrated by Tony DiTerlizzi and Dave Trampier and Errol Otis. It's like those are all my those images are burned in my brain forever, and that was really, really cool to just be a part of it. I've worked on a slice of D&D history, and that's kind of mind blowing. That when I think about it, I'm like, wow, yeah, I got to steer the Enterprise for a little bit, so it was kind of fun.
That is cool. Thanks for sharing that story. That was awesome. Where can people reach out to you and follow your progress with Mysterious Alchemy and any other projects you're working on?
I'm such I'm not quite a Luddite, but I do have social media. I believe my Twitter handle or X handle now is Adam of Adventure. And I do have an Instagram, but I generally just post like, I'm in the Redwoods, or, I found this crazy flower today. But I will every now and then post something where if I'm giving a talk at a bookstore, or there's some event that I'm going to be at, I'll post on there. And that is Adam Lee Writer. I believe people can find me on Instagram there. So I have those two social media, and I'm wanting to do more of that, because two of my other books that I wrote, they're like booklets, but they're on tarot. I did the Dungeons and Dragons tarot booklet, and I did the Magic the Gathering tarot booklet. And I've always wanted to sort of go card by card through each of those tarot sets and do like a little Instagram post about each one. So after I get back from my adventure here, I'm going to start to work on that and get a little bit more social media savvy and just kind of share the work that I've been doing. So
awesome. Well, Adam, it's been an absolute joy visiting with you. Everybody, Worlds and Realms is the book. Definitely don't miss this one. It's a great read. It's a great idea starter. And if anything else, put it on the coffee table for the pictures and the stories. It is wonderful. Thank you so much, Adam, for joining us.
My pleasure, Dan, Tom. You guys are great. Thank you very much. I really appreciate all the kind words, and I'm glad that the book is, bringing you some smiles. And I think there's a whole nother discussion to be had about teachers and Dungeons and Dragons. I'd love to hear more. I could talk to you guys about that for hours, because I think there's a lot of power in the game, just as a force of good in the world, and that it transforms. I have my own sort of personal story about how it changed my life. So a future podcast for sure.
Excellent. Yes, excellent. Definitely. We would love to have you back on for sure. So until that time, I want to say happy holidays to everybody, and to you, Adam. But for Adam and for Dan, I'm Tom Gross, and everybody keep rolling those 20s. We'll talk to you later.